We will start off with Pijus' presentation and a couple of words about the Pijus. I would say that he was born in AWS because he started his career building solutions on it. And then through his career, he learned various things, including agile ways of working, a bit of the architecture, and through his journey, learned that you have to be hands-on to be able to move things forward. And this shift left ideology fits him very well. So please, Pijus, come to the stage and let's hear your talk on how I accidentally started doing DevOps.
Yeah, so thank you, Nereus, and as he said, my name is Pijus and I'm a tech lead in the Telesoftas. And today I'm gonna talk about you how I accidentally started doing DevOps and how my code no longer runs on thoughts and prayers. Or more seriously, I'm gonna talk about infrastructure as code using Amazon Web Services, Cloud Development Kit, Aws Cdk for short, from a perspective from a developer who didn't have that much experience with infrastructure as time went. So I'm gonna start with small introduction and my motivation behind this topic. Then I'm gonna show you how easy it is to use, and then just gonna finish with some notes. So I'm a full stack web developer, and most of my career I have been, but my full stack included a front end, back end, and various databases. But I could never really get my hands on the typically DevOps portion of work of actually configuring our code. And that's like a hugely important part of what I'm building. And I started noticing that most of my colleagues, or at least many of my colleagues, had a very similar story. So they didn't really have the skills or knowledge to do some basic cloud infrastructure things. So it could be simple things like they didn't know how to set up and deploy a server to the cloud, or something more practical, like maybe you were developing a feature and you could have used AWS service to really cut down on your development time or make it a better feature, but you didn't really know how or have access to use it. And that's not very good for day-to-day work, I think. And I started wondering, why is this the case? Because I think currently developers and DevOps disciplines are very separate. And I'm not completely sure why. I think a lot of it is just it became an extremely different skill set. But I think what's happening right now is we don't have a lot of cross-discipline people who can do both DevOps and just normal or typical application development. And we're losing a bit with it, because I feel like if you think about people who work on front end, back end, kind of like jack of all trades, master of none, they have pretty valuable opinions when you look at maybe at cross-stack stuff, and if there's complexity in your application, they can give you a good view, maybe where should you put that complexity, so overall it's less. But as I said, I don't think we have a lot of that right now. And I think a common scenario when building new projects now is you basically, people at the beginning start up, they develop the whole infrastructure, but as a project and as the complexity grow, you get that infrastructural knowledge very centralized. It becomes a bit too complicated to share. And when new developers join, it's really too hard for them, and it's too time consuming to understand infrastructure well and contribute to it. So that was my story. I started working in a company that was ongoing, and I couldn't really contribute to any of the infrastructure. And my skills and knowledge on the topic really decayed. And whenever we would release to production, I was always a bit anxious, because sometimes it can end up with like, well, it worked on my machine. But it doesn't have to be this way. Infrastructure as code alleviates a lot of that pain and like kind of socializes that knowledge for the whole team. And that's where my story starts here at Telesoftas. So I joined a project that was using Aws Cdk, and it wasn't that difficult. And my full stack got fuller stacker, right? So now I'm gonna show you how easy it is to actually use and do DevOps stuff, well, some, on AWS using Aws Cdk. So I'm gonna show you how to just set up a new project, deploy AWS Lambda, and whoever doesn't know, Lambda just runs your code on the cloud. Then we're gonna deploy an S3 bucket, which is like a hard drive on the cloud, and we're gonna make those two interact, and I'm gonna finish up with some notes. So, this is the wrong browser. To show you that I'm not lying, we're gonna use 3 of the AWS services, and as you can see, all of them are currently empty. There's nothing there. So to start a new project on Aws Cdk, all you need is a new folder. Let's call it friendly. And let's open it in VS Code. We have the window here. And first thing that we're gonna need is to have the Aws Cdk locally. Well, for this, I'm gonna be using, I copied the whole wrong thing. For this, I'm gonna be using TypeScript, just because we're using it day to day. This works in several different languages. Java is one of them. So as you can see, I have it installed locally, and then we're gonna initialize a new repository. So this basically builds an empty node-looking project. It does something very similar in all of the different languages. So it basically builds all of the basic files you need. Currently, it's not doing anything on the cloud. It just does it locally. And the only thing we're gonna do is we need to tell it where to look. So it would use our account and not some random account. Cool. And that's it. And now we're gonna deploy it to the cloud. And I'm gonna show you what's happening in here. So CloudFormation in AWS it's like a template of how to deploy your services. So it will describe your databases, your whatever EC2s, and tell the AWS how to deploy them. And this AWS CDK usually compiles into it, and the CloudFormation actually does the deployment. It is not 100% the case, but it usually is. And this is always a risk. Basically, if you're using several AWS profiles locally, this might crash and burn and give you red errors. Hopefully it will work this time. No, I do not want to update. Cool. So while it's doing its thing, you can see it actually successfully is doing a thing. I'm gonna tell you a bit how the whole CDK looks. So CDK has what it's calling a stack. A stack is like your application's house. It can have logic, but it will only be run during the deployment. And inside the stack, you will be referring to what it's called constructs that I will show in a second. And those constructs actually are parts of your applications. They're certain features. And those can interact between them. Cool. So this is deploying some basic things. Really, I've never read into this. You don't really need to. It just makes it run. And that's why I kind of like this, because it is very easy to start. So we can look at the cloud, and we can see it created some files in the CDK. We don't actually need them, and it just, in your AWS account, it created a CDK toolkit, which basically makes it run better. Cool. So the first thing I want to do is actually deploy a Lambda that runs something. So we're going to deploy a Lambda that we're going to call a greeter Lambda. And this declares basically, OK, this is the thing we want to deploy. And for it to be deployable, we need to write another file that's basically just called the stack's name plus something greeter Lambda. You can directly refer to that file, but I like to structure my code like this because it's a bit cleaner in my projects. So cool. We have a Lambda function that exports a handler. That's an AWS requirement. And basically all it does is return hello world. And I forgot to do a yarn install. And this basically deploys the function. So in a second, I will show you how the deployment actually happens and prove that it works. Cool. Something worked. Let's see if something else works. So all we need to run here is to deploy the CDK. So what the CDK deploy does, nope. It doesn't do anything apparently. Yeah, I probably didn't bootstrap this project. Nope. Let's undo a bit of this, and let's undo a bit more of this. So we're just gonna import the files that we want. Cool. This looks way better, right? So this is a pretty realistic view to my day-to-day. I just basically look at the error messages when I fail to do something. So I have a lot of experience in this part. Nope. So, holy hell, this is a new one. So, yeah. So fun story. I did this 3 times. Worked out greatly. Yeah, on my exactly the same computer that I'm doing right now. Yeah, it was going great. This time, maybe new features. Yeah. Cool. So, I don't know if this happens again. I'm actually gonna look at the error message, and here we are. Cannot read or write on a closed pipe. So I know what happened, probably. So it's trying to deploy into one of the AWS services. So I'm just gonna explain while I'm doing this weird stuff. So when you usually deploy a new Lambda, you need to upload it into S3, and your basically code would pick it up from S3, which is cool. It just takes a bit longer. By a bit, I mean it might take like up to 5 minutes sometimes to do this. And but you have an option to use this package that they recommend themselves called ESBuild. And as you can see, that was there. So what it did, it bundled the code locally, and it's actually just uploading that straight into AWS. So that makes like Lambda change deployments really fast. Because we're deploying the first time, this can take up to a minute, but normally it could be like 20 seconds, which when you start working on the cloud most of the time, you really lose some of that velocity compared to if you were working locally, because it's way harder to just like throw out some code, see if it works, throw out some code, see if it works, because the throwing out is taking time. But this local bundling, it's kind of very similar to that. Cool. So something is green and something deployed. So let's look in the AWS. So, oh god. So we can see there's a this stack, friendly stack that I just deployed, and this is a CloudFormation stack. So in real life, it looks like this, and this is what you would need to do if you were not using AWS CDK. And this is really cryptic, and I do not understand it. But in reality, this is all I see, create complete, and maybe I can look at events of, okay, what's actually happening right now. And if we look at the Lambdas, we can see, yeah, cool, a Lambda was created. So in the Lambda, you can actually see the code. If it's small enough, once it grows, it's not there. And because in our code, we didn't really care about what event we're sending, so we're just gonna say, yeah, sure, send this event. We just want to confirm that it says hello world. And it does. And cool. So I was able to deploy something to the cloud in an automated way that I can replicate easily in what? 5 minutes. If I didn't do any errors, I would be down to 2 minutes. So cool. But that's pretty easy as it is. You basically upload file to AWS if you wanted to do it manually, right? Or any different way. So for my next trick, I'm gonna create something else. And I'm gonna create a bucket. So I'm here. Cool. So the bucket comes in one of parts of AWS CDK lib, and it's called S3. And to create the bucket, you really need to, let's say it's a const friendly bucket, and it's AWS CDK. Sorry, I forgot, it's a new bucket. We pass this, we pass a name to it. I'm gonna call it my social anxiety, so you all know how comfortable I feel right now. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna run deploy, so it deploys the bucket in the meantime. And so the goal of this exercise is actually to make the Lambda right into the bucket, so it actually is not utterly useless. And for that, normally outside of AWS CDK, you would need to probably pass the variables through some other system. So you would need to store a parameter of like, what's the bucket name? Or if you're realistic, you're just gonna copy the bucket's name and pass it to your other code, and not always do it in an automated way. But for this, what we actually need to do is just say we're passing something into an environment variable of the other thing. So we're just gonna say it's a bucket name, and from friendly bucket there is a thing that's called bucket name, and that's pretty much it. So now if I want to react to the bucket from my code, I have this copied so I don't write for a long time, but I'm gonna go through this, what everything actually does while it's deploying. So we say we want something, we want to store hello world string. We initialize a new S3 client, and we're basically just uploading it to our bucket, right? And the bucket name is passed through this process environment variables, which is really weird to do, but it makes it a bit easier. So as you can see, you make the bucket and you pass a reference to the bucket. And most of you might not understand how cool this is, because the other ways are really gross and usually just copy-paste code. But this way, I can kind of forget about it, which I like not knowing things. Cool. So we can see the friendly stack is doing something, and it's updating the Lambda, so it parallelizes those processes. And actually, what you can see here is pretty much the same as you can see in here. I think it just stopped. Yeah. So if we look at our buckets, we can see there should be a new bucket that's called my social anxiety. It's going great. I love these errors. Really, really working out. Now, this is even not my fault. Cool. Okay, so we have an empty bucket. Ta-da! And we have a Lambda that if we refresh, we should see that there's code here, right? It has our new code. So let's do the same. As I showed, we have a bucket, we pass the reference into the Lambda, and we want the Lambda to write into the bucket. And oh, what is this? Oh no, access denied. My Achilles heel of actually configuring the accesses in infrastructure code. I'll need to get some help, or will I? Because I can do some of the infrastructure now. And the error message is pretty self-explanatory, right? It says access denied. So we know that we need for the S3 to give consent to the Lambda to write in it. And even without a true story, I didn't start this error the first time when I saw. I didn't start by Googling it. I just kind of tried writing something, and it kind of worked, because I knew I have a bucket, and I need to either put or write. So yeah, I just need to grant write, and I need to pass the reference to the Lambda. And that's it. It's super easy. I really didn't need to know that much. And I'm going to deploy it now, and I'm going to show you what I would have needed to know otherwise, which is fine. You will end up needing to know a bit more if you use it and how the actual policies look, but I think for most stuff, it gets you going way faster. And just another minute of something happening. And in the meantime, let's see what is it trying to do. Something. Cool. So I think if we look for this, yeah. So this is actually what I would have needed to do otherwise. So creating a new policy that does blah 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 blah. And good luck remembering this, because you're gonna Google it every time you need it. And in day to day, it's not fun to do, because I would usually ask someone else to do this and they didn't know what to do, and it's a whole thing. And now it's not a whole thing, and we have successfully deployed it. So now when I say test, yeah, cool, it passed. And if I look at my bucket, this is my file name. Yeah, and I have a file, and if I open that file, it says hello world. So here we go. My social anxiety has something to keep it occupied. And that is pretty much the gist of it. I could literally do like a couple more hours of this, but all this is you declare several services and you make them connect. And I think for me, the biggest problem working with cloud always was there's a lot to know, and it's kind of hard to find that information, and how do the policies interact, and it's a hard topic. And just this, instead of 200-300 lines of something somewhere, it's not even centralized, is way better. Well, it's way easier for me, and I can explore with it, and it's cool. So, cool. I'm gonna go to my finishing notes. Yes, finishing notes. And first I'll go to my pros. So maybe a bit before that, I've worked with this for almost a year now, day to day. It's been out for 3 years, so I'm there for 30% of the time, so it's pretty cool. And I think one of the coolest things about it, well, the two coolest things about it is it's really easy to onboard new people, because they can basically go through your code and look at how everything is deployed. And you kind of minimize the risk of something being deployed and no one knowing about it. Another pro that I wrote down when I wrote this is most services are supported. It wasn't the case like a year ago. It's still not the case that everything is supported right now. For some things, you literally need to paste those like policies, which are long tests. Another cool thing is if you're working already on an AWS project, you can kind of easily move over to this, because if you have a bucket or something, all you would need to do is say, instead of that, you would say AWS S3 bucket from bucket name. And this is basically, if I do not create the bucket in the stack, these two are essentially equivalent. And that is really useful, because maybe you have some more serious stuff from like a bigger database or something, and you don't really want to mess with that with AWS Cdk, because it is a bit risky, especially at first when you don't really understand everything that's happening. So you might export some of those like static serious services from the other side. And now going to the cons. So what you saw, it was like 1 minute max deployment times, and I was talking over it, but as your project grows like a lot, those deployment times goes to 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, which is a bit annoying if you're actually just developing on it, because we do develop on it. We all have our own AWS environments, and we do everything there. And So if you change a Lambda, it's under a minute. If you change something else that's referenced somewhere else, it will take you 10, 20 minutes, and you have to find other stuff to do, basically. Then debugging becomes difficult on big projects, which I guess it's a completely AWS thing. But I feel because it's so easy to get into this, looking for those error messages or where to look for stuff, it becomes way harder because you're not that familiar with AWS infrastructure and the whole thing. I really don't like AWS documentation, although I wrote it really politically that it's fine. I feel for the stuff I need, it's never there. And I think it's fair because it's such a huge service and they just didn't write the stuff I needed. And no local testing. So there are ways to mitigate this, a local stack, which is like a fake AWS on your machine, which is not made by AWS. And I wouldn't have too much trust in it. Maybe I should, but when I tried it, it didn't work. But most things don't. And but the no local testing thing is actually pretty big negative because I feel like that instant feedback loop of like I can try something within a minute is really important when making new things. But with this, you really lose that, and I wish that it wasn't the case, but it is. And yeah, so cool, and that's it. Questions? Hey.
Thank you, Pijus. Was a great demonstration with, of course, live demo gods visiting us, right? But despite that, very good, insightful, and actually demonstrating day-to-day life of Pijus hacking on the project. Yeah, so audience have a couple of questions. So the first one, a simple one, and the one that might cause a confusion. What are the differences or similarities between Aws Cdk and Aws Sdk?
So SDK is a source development kit. That's actually, so if you have a bucket and you want the, like we used just now, we changed it, whatever. So with SDK, we would do the action of actually putting code into the bucket. The CDK is Cloud Development Kit. It just infrastructure as code. It just makes everything connect. It's not actually like, doesn't do business logic in itself.
Yeah, I would only add that SDK you use in applications to consume AWS services, where in CDK you define those services that you can use, right? Okay, the next one would be, do you put this code to Git? How often you get merge conflicts?
So yeah, we do put it to Git. We actually started doing it something bit. We started putting all of the lambdas next to our infrastructure code, which would be unusual in most scenarios. It doesn't feel like we get too many merge conflicts. I seriously, in the last 6 months, I got like one. Yeah.
Nice. Then that means you have a nice architecture and nice layout of the files.
Sure.
Not putting everything into one. Cool. The next one question, what are the options for fallback in case AWS is down for some reason? It seems like the product you're building with this infra is completely reliant on AWS.
Yes. And if AWS is down, like half of the internet is down, so whatever. But I think a better argument for not being infrastructure dependent is price. But I think using this, you save on developer price. So hopefully it evens out.
Yeah, and the failures of AWS infrastructure happens quite locally. There are such cases, but there are also tools to avoid that by deploying the application to several locations that AWS provides. And for the development, then remember the university times and code to the paper.
Yeah. Because Twitter is down, you don't even know about it.
The next one and the last one question, then what's the difference between AWS SDK and Amazon Cloud Formation?
The thing is, what you said is still the same. The Cloud Formation is actually doing all of the deployments. The CDK is you describe it here. So, yeah, it's the same.
Yes, the same. Just you generate one with each with the CDK. You generate AWS Cloud Formation descriptions, and those descriptions was those long JSON or YAML files that you showed in the UI. So people used to write those, and that's not fun. Oh, okay. We have a question in audience.
So GitHub and Bitbucket are mainly repositories, but right now they're basically both have CI, so continuous integration, that once you merge your branches, you can force it to push. So AWS CDK really doesn't care if you use GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. I think the main differences will be the continuous integration setups, but they're not that difficult because you essentially, for that part even, you just need to give access for your Bitbucket or GitHub to actually push to the cloud, and that thing just runs CDK deploy. Literally one command. So, yeah.
Does that answer? Yeah. Thank you.
Unless it fails, then you're fucked.
Any more questions? Okay, then I invite you for a couple minutes of break, take a drink or something else, and see you soon.